Welcome to the Cutting Room Floor, a weekly podcast of the teaching team at High Point Church, where we talk about sermons, sermon prep, and things we wish we could say on Sunday morning. All right, welcome to the Cutting Room Floor. I'm surrounded today by some of our teaching team. We have Pastor Mike Willis.
Hey, y'all.
Pastor Jack Hilgas.
Hey.
And myself. My name's Nick Stoller. I'm the associate pastor here at High Point Church in Lake Wales, Florida. And we want you to know up front, you can always reach out to me, Nick at highpointlw.com, if you have any questions or comments, or you just want us to cover something. All right, so we are starting a new series. It is called The Red Carpet, and it is our Easter series. And Pastor Jack, you started that off for us just on Sunday.
Yep.
If you don't mind, just jump into that. Tell us a little bit about the series and then what you covered on Sunday.
Yeah, The Red Carpet is all about exploring this theme that we see in the Gospels where Jesus is invited into different parts of people's lives, and he responds to those invitations and how, when he does, and his presence comes into those, how they change. So, you know, Jesus is invited to a dinner party or to a funeral, and to a business launch or something. You know, we see these things happen, and we're going to see what happens in every one of those scenarios and draw the lessons out that we can for what would change in our lives if we were to invite Christ into our circumstances. So that's the theme that we'll be following.
And you started us off with his first public miracle, which was the launch of his ministry to an extent. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's John chapter 2. In fact, John is the only one that talks about this event, and it's the wedding in Cana of Galilee. And it fits our theme very well, first of all, because it's his first miracle. It's his first sign. That's what John says. But also, in the second verse of the text, it says, and Jesus was there because he was invited.
Yeah.
So it gives us a chance to kind of set the framework for the whole series. And it's really profound to say that he waits to be invited. And so that's what we talked about off the top on Sunday is, as a young man, I remember, as a little boy, actually, I remember that Warner Sallman painting of Jesus standing at the door and knocking.
Yeah.
And the verse that relates to it in Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And how astounding an idea it really is. We take it for granted because we've been raised in a Christian culture. But this picture of a God who waits to be invited and limits himself, limits his sovereignty to do that, is utterly unique into the Christian theology. It's a view of God that doesn't exist anywhere else, and it's vital to our faith. So that's we jumped in with the idea that, okay, so here's a time when Christ is invited into a wedding.
And so, Pastor Mike, I'll pass it over to you. What was something on this initial message of the new series? What's something that's gotten you excited or caught your attention?
This is actually one of my favorite passages about Jesus. And so I was excited to dig into this. One of the things that you said were you were just talking about people and where they came from. And you made the statement that the miracles of Jesus change us from who we were to who we can become. And so you talked about somebody that might have been struggling in their marriage and no longer is, or somebody that used to be in addiction, or they would cut themselves, different things like that. I also thought it was interesting to talk about the 20 to 30 gallon jars, the 6 of them that they filled water up with, and that's where the wine came from. Walking us through that and helping us do the math, what I think was kind of eye-opening, because it really helped us see that. And you asked the question then, what do you think would have happened if they just stopped halfway?
Yeah.
If they only filled up half of them,
that was
or filled the jars up halfway? And then you left us with this idea that I'm not sure that they would have gotten any kind of miracle at all, because they wouldn't have obeyed.
Right.
And the whole point was that they did whatever Jesus told them to do. Yeah. And I just think that's such a challenge for us to always consider, well, what is he telling me to do? And is that okay for me to do it halfway, or to actually go all the way and do what he told me to do specifically? So I thought that was helpful to kind of break that down and help us understand that.
I thought what was really interesting on the front end too, what you talked about, how, he limits himself to become involved in your situation until you invite him into your situation, which I think is really, really, really neat. But something that I took down as a note was you spent some time describing like the importance of a small town environment
Yes.
that he was in that
Right.
yeah, and in that time. And I think it's so pivotal for people to realize, and I'll pass it over to you to maybe explain a little bit more about the importance on that. But I just think that when you start considering the situation that these people were in at the wedding, it is important for us to realize that God is interested in everything happening in our lives.
Yes.
And it's not just limited to you holding a belief, but also how's your life going?
Yeah.
How's your family doing? How's your business? He wants a part of everything, and actually he wants to be involved in everything. But what was the emphasis there for you?
Yeah. So like Mike said, this has always been a story that I liked and it fascinated me, but I wasn't always sure exactly why. And part of it is that Christ does begin his public ministry with a miracle at a very small private family celebration. And it's not the kind of miracle that you would do if you were just trying to attract attention,
right,
or, confirm your identity. Making water into wine so that people can have some alcohol at their wedding doesn't seem to be the way that God would initiate his public ministry. So, there's an awful lot. Then as you begin to get into the story, you realize, first of all, that this running out of wine was a big deal. So you learn a lot as you delve into the background of weddings and how important they were and how big a social obligation they were and how devastating a public failure it would be for this couple if it became known that they hadn't adequately supplied for their city to celebrate with them. So right off the top, one of the side notes that I think is important is that everyone back then understood that your marriage has implications for the entire community, which I think we should recover that idea today. But then the other idea is that Mary comes to Jesus and whispers to him, they are out of wine. But that news is going to get out soon. She pulls Christ aside before the crisis erupts. And what I really wanted to drive home is that just like that, in small towns like Cana or Lake Wales, Florida, there are a lot of people who are putting on airs. They're keeping up appearances, but they know that the pantry's empty. They know that the wine jar is empty, and they're hoping that nobody finds out.
Right.
Because if it ever does get found out, it's going to be embarrassing and socially catastrophic for them. And the first step to getting out of that desperate situation is either you or someone honestly confessing what your situation is to Christ.
Right.
So I called that the second invitation, is inviting Christ into the mess that you're in.
Yeah, and I thought that was neat when you were talking about the mess that you're in. You broke it down in 3 steps based off of what happened here,
Right.
which was confess it, then believe it, or believe that he cares,
Right.
and then do what he tells you to do, which I thought that was a really neat way to break it down. I do want to talk about a little bit, like your second move was asking for help. And you even called that a second invitation when Mary invites Jesus into the mess. And it's almost one of those responses from Jesus, woman, woman, my time's not yet come now. Don't get me involved with this.
Right.
What were there pieces of that during that section that you wanted to expound on, or?
Yeah, they're throughout. I think at the end, the last move of the message, I said that, this story was told by John, and there's a lot of symbolism woven through the story, because that's the way John writes his gospel, which is also why I think this is the only gospel where this story appears.
Right.
So, there's an awful lot I would have said. I think it's significant that Christ does his first miracle at a wedding celebration, and our relationship to Christ as his church is, we're the bride of Christ, and he's our bridegroom, and there's a lot you can draw out of there. But from with the time that we had on Sunday morning, the thing I probably would have enjoyed spending more time on is, what did Jesus mean exactly when he said, "My hour has not yet come"?
Yeah.
What that hour that he came, and I just think I was able to say this, but I couldn't spend the time on it that I wanted to, is that means that Christ had an appointment made for him. And the God who lived outside of time and existed before time was created had a date circled on his calendar And obviously that could only be done because he and the Father were making decisions about creating humanity and taking the risk of creating a free humanity. And so already making provision for what was necessary for our salvation because they understood the risk and they felt like it was worth it for love. So I would have liked, I was able to say that, but it would have been fun to spend more time on that.
Pastor Mike, I know you've preached on this message, I'm sure, and over the years.
Mm-hmm.
What's some things that you would have loved to spend more time on throughout this message?
I think just the obedience that's being asked, that do whatever he tells you. I have preached this before, and it was a very personal time for me, a really low time, and I was preaching this actually asking God to do something miraculous in this situation. And there were some things that he was asking me to do. And I so the whole do whatever he tells you part was really important, and it still is. And I think that he just is looking for that kind of obedience in all of us.
Right.
Am I going to be willing to do that, no matter how far-fetched it is, or how inconvenient it is, or painful it is? Am I going to trust him completely to do whatever it is that he tells me to do and leave the results to him?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we all have to grasp in our lives. And when I look back on that time in my life, I was asking him to do something. I was trusting him by faith. I was going to live like he was going to do it, and I was going to believe that. And he did, and so it's an easier story to tell because he did come through. But I think it all starts with, are we going to be willing to do that? I was just reading in my devotional time today that there was a time that he didn't do miracles because people didn't have faith. And so where does that come in? My obedience, yes, but I've got to have the faith to say, okay, he knows what he's talking about.
Right.
And so I'm just going to go all in and do everything that he's asking. I think there's a lot there for people to really consider.
Yeah. So there was one line that you repeated a few times, and because it was pivotal, and I think it's something everybody can draw from, is you're going to have to tote water before it gets turned into wine.
Yeah.
Which I was just like, man.
I saw people posting that on social media.
I mean,
actually.
that's just a powerful line.
Yeah, it was.
And it's a powerful truth about it all. And I think to pair it with something else you had said, I think this was a quote that you referred to, was God saying to like the marriage couple, hey, I enjoyed the wedding, but invite me.
Yeah, invite me to the marriage.
Yeah, invite me to your marriage.
Billboard campaign from the late 90s. Yeah, the billboard was in Fort Lauderdale, but it was nationwide. Yeah, great line. Yeah, then I think that's probably that point, that move in the message was probably my favorite. It was the most fun because it's so practical and real. And it hadn't dawned on me. Like I said, it's the way my mind works. I think everybody does this. There's a reason why John told us about the jars and about the water pots and about how much they hold.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any word wasted in the text. So your brain automatically begins to calculate. And I'm thinking 180 gallons of water is a lot of water.
Yeah.
And it's not like they just had a hose there.
Right.
I mean, they had to go to the well and draw it and tow it back.
Yep.
And that had to take time. And you would imagine they would draw some attention doing that.
Right.
People start going, what are they doing?
Yeah.
So, and what I wanted to get to from that is wine is exciting, water is not.
Right.
And so, a lot of times when we're struggling, and I tried to spend a lot of time talking about marriage because this is a wedding relationship. We want God to just give us new wine. We come to an altar and we say, Lord, restore the intimacy, make us fall in love again, help us to laugh together again.
Right. Yeah.
And we're looking for, Jesus magic, church spells, and that's why people come to church. Let's get to that altar and get this thing fixed. We were screaming at one another on the way to church. We're going to be kissing each other on the way home. And that's very rarely how it works.
Yeah.
A lot of times what God will give you will be as tasteless as water to you. You got to go to counseling. You got to get off your phone.
Yep.
You got to start helping around the house.
Yep.
And that's just not exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the discipline of toting that water that will get you to the wine. That water will turn into wine, but you've got to stick with it. And I just thought that was a profound thought that And like Mike was pointing out earlier, again, my mind is, I don't need 180 gallons of wine. I'll take 90 gallons.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
and
enough,
again,
right.
a lot of people would go, "Hey, well, you know, we just need a little bit of Jesus.
Yeah, let's just see if this works. Let's see if this worked really."
And I could just see me. I think that's what I would have done in that
great.
situation. And
Right.
I would have stopped after 90 gallons and started looking in there.
Right.
And so I asked the question, you know, how much wine would they get if they stop halfway? And your mind automatically goes 90 gallons.
Right.
But I think probably none.
Maybe
Right.
0.
Yeah, probably the water doesn't turn into wine until you've done everything the Lord's told you to
Yep.
do.
No, yeah, and part of you had said that none of the words were wasted in this. If you look at the very beginning of the story, it mentions 3 days.
Yeah,
After 3 days, and you're just like, oh wow.
Yeah,
Right.
how far do you want to go with that?
I know. I was like,
That's
I wonder
good.
when he's going to jump on. And I'm like, man, there is so much you can pull from this.
Yes.
Something else with that water and wine is it's when you drop water on your shirt, you know, it dries up. When you drop
Right.
wine on your shirt,
Yeah.
it's going to stain.
Stay there, yeah.
Yeah. When you drink water, it sustains you. When you drink wine, it's going to affect the way you behave.
Right.
And there's just so much to talk about with
Right.
all of that.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Even Jesus was there the whole time, but until he had the invitation to change something, that's when something happens.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
was really, really neat. Go ahead, Pastor Mike.
At the end of it, in verse 11, what Jesus did here was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
Right.
So that's kind of a head scratcher phrase there, because they're with him because they've already decided to follow him. They've already left their nets immediately and followed him. So it makes me wonder about this deeper walk that we should have with him, that the longer I walk with him, the more I trust him. That over and over he proves that, like that old hymn, "'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus." It's my favorite hymn. And that's what I think we're getting at here is that, yeah, I've trusted you enough to follow you, but now I saw you do this, and that's a whole new level of power that you're displaying, and now it's going to make me believe in you even more.
Right.
And so what are those times in your life where he's done something amazing, miraculous, unexpected, and it's caused you to believe in him even more than you have before that?
Sure.
And I just think that needs to happen in our lives.
And that, I think you're touching on something there, because the first chapter of John, it obviously is that incredible prologue about the Word. In the beginning was the Word. And and then you have this interaction where Nathan talks to Jesus, and Jesus says, "I saw you under the fig tree."
Yeah.
And Nathan believes in him. And Jesus says, "You believe because of that?" Because I was able to say, you're going to see greater things than this. And then the next thing he sees is the water into wine.
Right.
And I think you see this gradual intensification
Yes.
of the signs that people see. But the point is, for me, is that, and what I emphasized on Sunday is they believed because they saw that little miracle.
Right.
And we often think that God has to do big things to
Sure.
convince. In fact, that's what we concentrate on, the big miracles, the splitting of the sea and the feeding of the 5,000, walking on water. And yet it's these little personal miracles that really they do produce faith. So that's, you alluded to this earlier, Mike, where I can stand up here all day and give you all of the rational reasons that you ought to believe in the resurrection of the dead. And to me, it's compelling and convincing evidence. And how can anyone not believe in the Christian gospel if they believe in the resurrection of the dead? But you know what? That's a rational argument, and I don't know that I've ever led anyone to faith with that argument.
Yeah.
But if I can introduce them to someone who got off of drugs,
Right.
or someone whose marriage was saved, or someone who was near suicide and now is full of joy,
Yeah.
those personal little miracles that happen in their life produce, at least God uses them to produce faith.
Right.
I think much more than these big historic things that we refer to. So that's I think why this miracle is so significant.
Well, and I think too that there are probably times when, okay, yeah, we expect him to do the big things. He's a big God,
Right.
but does he really love me enough to care about these little things? Like you said earlier, turning this water into wine and making sure this couple isn't embarrassed that's a big deal in a small town, but in the grand scheme of things, creation of the world,
Right.
it's really not.
Yeah. Right.
But it kind of should help us think about does he pay attention to those little things in my life?
Right.
And how can I expect him to show up there, or how can I be willing to invite him to show up?
Right. And again, John writes his gospel for two audiences, and he structures it intentionally. In fact, he's different from the other gospels for that purpose. So he selects this material and writes about it for a specific end. It really did happen. It's just the way that he arranges the material. And I think that's why, he's writing to a Gentile and Jewish audience. And that's why the ceremonial pots and the wine come together. Yeah. Because it's that whole idea of, how the religion of the Jewish people, and not the Old Testament religion, but the traditions of the elders, were leaving people without joy.
Right.
There was no life change. There was no intoxication. Right. There was nothing I think the two lines I use is it can't clean you up and it can't bring you joy.
Yeah.
Right.
And Jesus specifically chose those ceremonial wash pots and filled them with new wine because he's unveiling himself. He's revealing himself as the source of real cleansing and real joy.
Yep, and I love that. You're not going to use these pots now to clean your hands.
No.
You're going to use them to change who you are. I love that.
Right.
And then the other thing, I was thinking, so I have kids, 4 of them, you guys know that.
Right.
And I tell them to go do things for me all the time. That's why you have children.
Right, sure.
Make them do things for you.
Little servants.
So I ask
They're expensive, though.
Yeah, they are.
Yes.
So like I'm sitting down, I'm like, Luca, go get me a drink or whatever, a bottle of water. She comes in, no big deal, right?
Right.
I think about the guy who had to take this water to the master of the banquet.
Yeah.
At what point did it become wine? Nobody gets to know.
Right.
Nobody knows.
Was it already wine? But when you're like, I would be shaking.
He wasn't told to taste it or make sure that it was the real deal. Yeah.
It was still water by all we know. And that's like, at what point does the miracle happen? Yeah. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, how incredible it would have been.
Right. So all of that, not only all of that time and work to tote water, but then the risk of carrying it to the master of ceremonies.
Yep. Here you go. This is the one. I just think this was a great way to start off the whole series because it brings things to a personal place, which I loved. Bumping into God was so pivotal and impactful. But this almost goes a little bit deeper into who Jesus is and how personal of a God we serve. And that he has a meaning and a purpose for everyday life events.
He wants to, and so that brings us back to that that Billboard quote, which was from 1997 or 98, I think 97, in Fort Lauderdale. That line that was attributed to God. I love the wedding. Invite me into your marriage.
Yeah.
And that's what we're hoping to see happen through this whole series is in every circumstance of your life, invite him in.
Yeah.
He's going to make all the difference. The things that you have no answer for because you're hopeless and helpless and you're a sinner and you're screwing it up and you're going to keep screwing it up. Sure. Jesus has the answers. Yeah. So invite him in and he will bring new wine to your relationships.
So Pastor Mike, you're coming to us this next week, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you're sharing on Sunday.
We are going to John 12, where Mary pours a jar of perfume on Jesus' feet and wipes it with her hair. Judas objects because he's like, why are we wasting this? It's worth a year's wages.
Right.
And then Jesus says, leave her alone. This was intended to be setting my body up for the day of my burial. This is all happening at a dinner party where Jesus is invited because he's just resurrected Lazarus from the grave, from the dead. Wow. And they're throwing this in honor of Jesus. And all this is happening there. And you've got a crowd of people there that are starting to believe in Jesus because of what Lazarus did. And then you have a crowd of religious leaders who want to kill Lazarus as well because people are going over to follow Jesus.
Wow. So
all of these things, we're going to be talking about what happens when we give our all to Jesus.
Yeah.
When we give him all he's asking.
Yeah.
Great follow-up to the do whatever he tells you part, and what can happen as a result of that. So we'll talk about worship. We'll talk about removing our worries and then strengthening our walk.
That's awesome.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Good stuff.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for the conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. And as always, you can get a hold of us by emailing me, Nick at highpointlw.com. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Take care.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Cutting Room Floor. If you have questions about High Point Church or want to find out more, go to highpointlw.com.